Hello, everyone. I'm your podcast host, Brent Van Conant, bringing you another in our series of recordings focused on practical advances in soil health for Western Canadian farmers. These recordings are part of a larger soil health initiative coordinated by Assiniboine College, bringing together a network of many Western Canadian grower groups and other organizations to continue to advance soil health in ways that accommodate the unique circumstances of each farm. This podcast and the overall soil initiative are made possible through the generous support of the Weston Family Foundation. If you like what you are seeing and hearing, tell a friend and feel free to check out our website, soilhealthnetwork.ca, to find out more about our soil health project. Thanks for joining us. I'm really pleased today that we have Blake Weiseth with us. And just for a little bit of background, I have the bio of Blake here that says he comes with the pedigree of coming from a mixed grain farm and livestock farm from Shaunavon, Saskatchewan. He holds a joint role of applied research lead at Glacier FarmMedia Discovery Farm and the research chair at Saskatchewan Polytech, and is currently pursuing a PhD in soil science. Not only is he a professional agrologist, he was the outstanding young agrologist in 2024. And you continue to work on your PhD evaluating management practices and emerging technologies, and have this interest in optimizing water and nutrient use efficiency while limiting nutrient losses in runoff. And I looked at your resume and I see you're in the middle of a whole bunch of publications. You've been a busy guy in your young part of your career.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Brent. No, and mostly I've just been so fortunate to work with all sorts of great people. Most recently, I guess, with my dual appointment, but then also, of course, with Dr. Jeff Shano at University of Saskatchewan. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I did a little bit of extra homework, and some of those people that you have been working with have described you as highly motivated and dedicated to all endeavors, have this kind of never give up, do whatever it takes to excel, kind of lifelong learning motto. Uh, a great guy who's intelligent and loves soil. And strangely enough, apparently you're a good rook player. So I don't know where that fits in to the world of soil and soil health. Um, but there were quite glowing remarks from the folks that you've had a chance to work with. And you're still pretty new at this.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of kind of that mentality of, I guess, just wanting to do a good job and working hard. I do owe to growing up on the farm and sort of that, contributing and family bonding around the key times of the growing season. And then even, I guess, just in my research, thinking about always having that practical lens. Like at the end of the day, how can we help farmers in the prairies here?
So what's this kind of special relationship with water and nutrient movement? And you've obviously right from early in your career, you got had a special interest in that. Where where does that come from, or what part of that gets you kind of the most excited?
Yeah, and really, I think it does go back to the early days of growing up on the farm in the southwest part of the province. Of course, we're in the brown soil zone in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan. We annually have a net deficit of moisture. Soils with relatively low organic matter. So you put those things together, and moisture is always top of mind. But the funny thing about water management in agriculture is very rarely, if ever, of course, do we have that idealized situation. So, be it on the one end of the spectrum that we're used to dealing with in the southwest part of Saskatchewan, where, we're periodically dry, we maybe get a good, in-season thunderstorm to help us out. Or if you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're dealing with periodically flooded soils, regardless, water management is at play, and so I think that's really became evident for me in the research that I started because starting in 2021 for my PhD studies, it was quite a dry year in Saskatchewan. And so just kind of making that top of mind and then seeing how that's kind of played out over the remaining years of the study.
Well, it's a remarkably delicate balance, isn't it? Like I'm in Carmen, Manitoba, on our farm. I can think of years when we've had both drought and too much in the same year.
That's a
So
really good point. Yeah.
timing matters a whole lot.
Yeah.
And the kind of I I don't know which way it goes that when good weather tells you whether you've got a good soil, or good soil tells you whether you can manage bad weather. That's kind of a unique relationship around um, water and soil health that you're looking at it from the water point of view more than some might.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's a great point. You wisely note that while we, talk of these even geographic extremes in sort of the average moisture situation, there is also this interannual variation. 20, I think of 2021 even compared to 2023, quite a different story here in
Mhm.
Saskatchewan. But then you even drill down a little bit uh, in higher resolution, and within a given year, you can swing back from those extremes. So yeah, it's always interesting, that's for sure.
So in your southwestern Saskatchewan, you start with a low organic matter and probably a water deficit. But in the world of things that you can do about that, on how you can adapt practices or think about ways to manage those unique moisture challenges. What is it that's been most encouraging about that work at a research level and at a practical level uh, that gets you excited and creates an outstanding agrologist?
Yeah, it's quite timely that you should kind of mention that, and it's something that I didn't see actually until just the last field season of my PhD work. So 2023 growing season, but leading into the 2024 spring snowmelt. And what we saw is straw management being a consideration, where in one of the treatments that I was looking at in my study had a tillage, a post-harvest tillage operation. And the idea behind that was to see, can we promote infiltration of snowmelt water? Can we incorporate the crop residue to hold those nutrients in place rather than being lost to the runoff water? But what we sort of didn't expect, or the interesting finding, is in um, that tilled treatment, because of the straw management being at play, it actually caught less snow over the
Mm,
winter and there was less meltwater. So it's quite intuitive. It's not rocket science, but just that little kind of aspect of straw management, cutting height or different tillage regimes, is something that's I would definitely be interested in exploring further. And then,
yeah.
the kind of humbling, interesting part about that too is in some ways there's nothing new under the sun. You think back to, even in the 1980s, looking about research that's been done in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, out of the Swift Current Research Site, they were looking at straw management back then, right? And
Yeah.
stubble height and all this thing. So in some ways, kind of looking at that, but seeing how we can apply that and further explore it.
So outside of the sort of the typical direct seeding, spread your straw around environment, is there something else that's sort of popping up in your mind to say that the patterns that we've fallen into may still need a little bit of tweaking? What what gets your curiosity about what I'll I'll call it, what does zero till plus look like, or what does minimum till plus look like
Mhm.
as we keep advancing practices here?
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. And I think the neat thing about that is and I think it relates to some of the other work that you and I are working on in terms of engaging with producers to get
Mm,
their thoughts and opinions on different things, and honestly good ideas as a researcher. But I mean, something that has caught my attention, and interestingly, he's a farmer that is a neighbor to where I grew up on the farm, but I've, followed him on social media. And one of the practices that he is looking at to manage, these perennially dry brown soils is the use of a stripper header on
Mm,
cereals or even other I think canola, he's tried it too. But the whole point is, again, can you think outside the box in terms of leaving that extra stubble, higher stubble height, catching more snow? I mean, obviously, then you think on the flip side of having creating a good seed bed for seeding conditions. And again, these are probably this is sort of a regional concept that maybe doesn't resonate too well with your more wetter growing season conditions in Manitoba, but it's some of the things that we're looking at in the Southwest. So
yeah. So where do you make the crossover between what's a soil health issue and what's a soil water issue? And
yeah.
if you come from the water world, um, as you think about the implications for creating soil health or having soil health to manage the water,
Mm-hmm.
what triggers you as the kinds of things that we could
Mm-hmm.
or should be paying some attention to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, really, really good question, really important question. Again, for me, I think it does kind of my stance on this is has been informed by my background growing up on the farm. But when I think of soil health and healthy soils, I think of productive soils. I
Mm,
think of soils that are able to achieve their intended outcome, which is to produce a commodity that can be, of course, a source of income and profit for farms, and something that's of use to society. So again, thinking about the three pillars of sustainability, I mean, all are at play. But if we have productive soils that are profitable, by very nature, I think we're going to have sustainable soil management as well. And so, some of the things that I think about, and even I saw it quite consistently and quite evidently in my PhD work. One of the things that I was looking at is kind of tracing where phosphorus is going throughout the
okay.
soil, plant, runoff water system, right? And ultimately, I guess the question is, what can we do to maximize our phosphorus use efficiency, right? So what we saw is those management practices that promote phosphorus uptake by the crop, those are there was an inverse relationship between phosphorus uptake and nutrient losses in runoff water, right? And again, it makes sense. If phosphorus, much of it does end up in the harvested grain and it's exported from the site at harvest. So just by very nature of if you can encourage crop use of that nutrient and you're sending it away from the field in the form of the harvested grain, just by very nature, there's less to be lost from the system. So I think it's kind of a simple way of thinking about it is, yes, there's of course nuances, there's lots of specific issues, salinity management, uh, nutrient deficiency, all sorts of things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, how can we promote healthy, productive soils?
Mm. And um, and can we improve soils or can we stop them from depleting? In that spectrum of I think about in my neighborhood. I'm sure when my grandparents were there, and it wasn't too long after it was breaking, that was probably 12% organic matter, and now I'm I feel smug because I'm 5 and there's other places that are 2, but I got to remember it was once 12. I mean, can I improve that? Or as you think about that whole, the distribution of soils in Saskatchewan is pretty wild from the ones you've talked about to some pretty parkland garden bed places. Um, can we could we or should we be thinking about how some of those soils could recover back to something closer than they once were? Or is that realistic in sight?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna say it's a bit of a yes and yes situation. And I think
Oh,
of
you're hedging, aren't you? Yes and yes.
I think
What?
of an interesting study comes to mind that Jeff Shano just wrapped up recently, and the whole idea of this is how do we rebuild the productivity of these knoll upslope
Mm,
soils in the field, right? And this, I mean, David Lobb at University of Manitoba has done a lot of this work as well.
right.
But Jeff Shano was looking at it recently, and so the idea again is we have these eroded knoll positions across the prairies that reflects the tillage erosion history, etc. How can we improve the productivity of these low topsoil, low organic matter, calcareous soils? And so what he did was he looked at different amendments. And so, balanced fertility, adding both macro and micronutrients, looking at manure as a treatment, and then sort of the kind of high level idealized situation is he actually moved topsoil that had been
Yep.
translocated down to the bottom up to the hilltop, right? And so what did they see? Well, that topsoil removal treatment was by far, the most productive. Now there was things like manure and even the balanced fertility did quite well too. So I think my yes and yes point, going back to that, is number one, just highlighting how important it is for us to stop degradation to the degree that we can, right? So, that history of tillage erosion and moving that topsoil had a profound impact, of course. And it's not an easy thing to fix. It can be quite
Yeah.
expensive. You can move topsoil from the depressions back up to the hilltops. It's not cheap and it's not simple. It can be done. But also, I guess, looking at, some of these amendments, manure, something to increase organic matter. Yeah, I think there is room for improving.
Okay. I keep chuckling at some of my dyed in the wool reduced tillage friends that go just sort of hold their head. You're going to bring a scraper into my field, but I guess in theory that's about returning the soil to where it originally started and
Yeah,
putting it back onto the hilltop
yeah,
that past practices let it get away from us.
yeah.
Um, and so when you Um, are there other components about soil health that you think are sort of new for us to put some time and attention in? You've eloquently talked about healthy soils or productive soils, and in a water scarce part of the world, water changes everything. Um, are there other things on your radar about how we're now viewing soil that, boy, we better think about microbiological activity or the percentage of biomass or those kinds of things. What sort of attracts your attention to we gotta think about soil a bit differently than maybe we have conventionally?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, the other thing that comes to mind from what I guess I can speak to mostly from my experience, I do think of this aspect of, precision management, site-specific management. I mean, I don't want to, dwell on the buzzwords or whatever, but this whole aspect of I think gone are the days that we are, broadly managing entire fields uniformly, or we have the ability to dive into that a little more. And so
Hmm.
of course, within that, you can think of, matching the nutrient application rates to the crop demand for fertilizer as it changes across the landscape, all that. But I guess the other thing that relates to soil health that I think is interesting is this aspect of targeted use of forages in the landscape, and
Okay.
particularly as it relates to salinity management, water management. And so, yeah, I mean, again, from the Southwest, of course, this is a very big topic of concern. How do we manage our salt affected soils? And so this was not directly in my PhD research, but as it relates to some of the things that I'm doing at the Discovery Farm, we just, it goes back to 2019, and the field we were in was we had it into canola that year, and during harvest, just looking, the one corner of the field was just a kochia field. You know what I mean? And
Uh-oh.
so you're just thinking like, wow, we've invested a lot of money into that portion of the field, getting no return, and in fact, potentially making it worse by all these kosher seeds being in the seed bed now. And so, can we think differently? So again, I mean, not something, high tech or whizzy, but can we look at perennial forages just as a tool? So what we did is we just kind of sectioned off a corner of that field, about 2 acres, and just looked at different treatments of perennial forages. And what we've seen definitely is there's a revenue generation there from that forage. Now, again, I don't want to gloss over the fact that you obviously need to have a market for that. You need to be able to sell it or use it yourself or something like this.
Yep.
But just that aside, you're changing unproductive and unprofitable land to something that is generating a profit. I do also think, and again, I'm not suggesting it's easy because I grew up on a mixed farming system,
Yep.
but I do think, if I'm looking at my crystal ball into the future, I do think, more livestock reintegration or at least kind of partnerships between ranchers and crop producers might be something that we're going to have to look at just for the kind of those soil health, nutrient stewardship
Mm,
related benefits. So,
yeah. Um, there's a little bit of there's a little bit of action around crop selection and the way maybe we uh, integrate lentils or chickpeas or
mhm,
fava beans or some of those other things that haven't always been in the picture.
mhm,
Um, e- and even the folks that are putting those things together in a polycrop kind of environment,
mhm.
are there pieces of that you think lend themselves to the soils that you come across in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do. I don't have direct experience working with intercropping in research, but I what I like about it is it seems to be something that's founded in good agronomy. I would say, right, as a management practice. I mean, I think we can look, in natural ecosystems, and of course we don't see monoculture very often, right? We see this kind of species working together, right? So
Yep.
and I've seen some of these synergistic benefits. I think particularly chickpea flax as it relates to disease pressure, these kinds of things. You can also look at something like peola, peas and canola, and the potential nitrogen benefits. So yeah, I mean it cracks open an interesting discussion on logistics and management and all this kind of stuff. But I
Yeah.
mean philosophically, I do think it's interesting. And I guess the other thing, just kind of within, as it relates to intercropping, I think kind of weed pressure is another
Mm.
consideration. And especially if you're alternating rows of a crop, perhaps you're closing that canopy a lot closer, reduce weed pressure. I think one of the other issues that we have just with kind of weeds and soil health is this mismatch of when we're applying nutrients relative to when the crop is
Mm.
demanding those. And so as in our direct seeding systems, we're putting the vast majority of our fertility down at the time of seeding. And what's the first thing to pop up? Those kochia weeds or whatever, right? And they're using those nutrients. So again,
Yeah.
I don't gloss over the fact that we have a short season. It's busy, but can we look at some of this split nutrient applications or in season nutrient applications, something like that too?
And in the world, I was just having this chat with somebody else too. It was one thing when we were side banding uh, 50 pounds of nitrogen beside
Mm-hmm.
us, beside in a cereal field, but
Mm-hmm.
when that's pushing to 100, 110, 120,
Mm-hmm.
and 40 pounds of phosphate and
Mm-hmm.
other things, that's a really concentrated high band that nature would never put that much
Yeah.
in that spot that quickly.
Yeah.
Uh, um, what can we I don't know, can we put inhibitors in that and be as successful as we could if we split applied, or if we split applied, is that going to be foliar, or is that going to be on the surface waiting that it's going to rain the next day, or what the like I buy the theory that split would be better, and then we start to wrestle with the practical implications of, okay, if if we did split, how would that actually work on
Yeah,
a
yeah.
conventional farm? I'm curious about where you think that who's going to try what next, and what's the progression of all that science going
Hmm.
to look like?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely, it's an exciting world to kind of think of, these so-called smart fertilizers, or, with different kind of, coatings, or different aspects of it to sort of prolong that nutrient availability. I think that could be a lot of interesting work. From a perhaps simpler standpoint, and I guess we haven't touched on it yet, but it's another thing that's interesting to me, and as it relates to this fertility but also water management, is looking more maybe at winter cereals,
Mm,
relative to spring. So again, as we know, if we think globally, of course, a lot more of these winter cereals relative to spring seeded. And one, can we leverage that split kind of time for field operations, get some fertility down in the fall at seeding, then have more time in the spring for top dressing, things like this, and then I
mm.
guess getting just that growth, so that you do have that competition right away when the spring gets going. So yeah, that might be something too.
Well, um, you don't have the 50 years of experience that some other folks have in this, but I'm curious about what is it is it all breeding, or what is it that's kept us from being a winter cereal? Um, like the it makes sense that that could and should work. It should work in a reduced tillage environment. Um, I'm curious that we don't have more progress. And in fact, if I remember, you were probably still in high school at the time, but we had a stretch where we had, at least in Manitoba, lots of fusarium pressure, and
Yeah,
varieties weren't managing it particularly well, and there was a big
yeah,
push on winter wheat to
yeah,
try to get ahead of the disease cycle and
yeah.
have fusarium free, and that's sort of it's kind of disappeared because maybe we solved the wheat breeding problem on spring wheat.
Right.
And I, I'm in a water cycle soil health world, boy, fall seeded crops should make a ton of sense.
Yeah. I and I mean, I guess, and maybe this is where you can shed some light onto it, but I mean, I guess, the whole winter kill thing, of course, is, a bit of a consideration, but
Yeah.
presumably, or hopefully, there's room to kind of insert some genetics into that to buffer against that a little bit
Okay.
too. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, what from the Manitoba context, what do you think was some of the major limitations that you were hearing from folks looking at that?
Oh,
Or is it also just, geez, I'm combining late into the season and who wants to fire up the drill? Like, I mean, is
well,
that the
well, this is the same argument why people aren't excited about cover crops and some of those other things as well. But I think we first for wheat in particular, um, the variety of wheats that started showing up 15 years ago had such a increase in improved yield and improved fusarium management, um, that it just sort of, whatever improvements we'd made in winter wheat, we just left it behind. Um,
I see.
and winter wheat was trying to not have a full wreck. And then we had some dry seasons and some better varieties, and well, we don't have full wrecks anymore. So why are we going to this trouble to do the
Yeah,
winter wheat thing? But
yeah,
um, maybe that's short-sighted. Maybe we should have been thinking about there's some phenomenal yields coming out of new hybrid varieties of rye,
Mm,
and
mm.
um, that's people are kind of giving their head to shake about that, going, "Ooh, wow! If we could do that in rye,
Looks
could
pretty good.
we do that in other crops?" Rye is a little more winter hardy than winter wheat seems to have been, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, I appreciate you raised that. I think there's something cool to happen in that world. Um, you and I have talked about this before, and part of our soil health initiative is making sure that we pursue ideas that make sense for farms first.
Yeah.
Um, there's been many occasions where people outside of farming have had felt like they've had more to say about farming practices
Yeah.
than is maybe always considered helpful.
Yeah.
Um, but when we get the soil health part right, um, I'm curious about how you see the society at large realizing some of those benefits as well. Like good healthy soil should be uh, using moisture at an optimum. It should be um, having lots of photosynthesis and capturing carbon. Like there's some good things overall that happen when we get it right for farmers. It's actually getting it right for the world outside of the farm too. Uh, is that do you find that an optimistic equation or a or a or a battle of the future of are they still going to let us use fertilizer and you're going to deal with this as a young man in this business. You're going to deal with this for decades longer than I am. I'm I'm curious what you see that soil health, community health, succession plan kind of look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sort of thoughts that come to mind when you raise this question. I think, these practices that support soil health, I do think there is these win-win situations where they are agronomically beneficial and environmentally beneficial, of course, too, right? So I think of again from my work, variable rate fertilizer application, where looking comparing it to a status quo situation in the VR treatment, we were able to reduce the phosphorus application rates by 20% compared to
Hmm.
the control. No yield penalty, but lower concentration of phosphorus in the runoff water. So I see this is a win-win where, farmers, they're able to reduce their costs, better profits. And, from a practicality standpoint, you read about, the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Center in Saskatchewan here. I think they just had to undergo, a very large renovation or increase to their plant to keep up with water quality treatment, like a $400 million renovation, right? So, I mean, and again, not that agriculture is, of course, the only contributor to water quality issues. There's other sources at play. But the point is, if we can reduce that impact to water quality, it translates into a dollar value sort of downstream. So I think there's that aspect. And then the other thing that's maybe a little more pie in the sky, I guess, is, this whole aspect of um, you know, rural communities and the health of rural communities. And, again, if you're having sustainable and profitable farms, they're able to contribute to these communities and give
Yeah.
back and add to it. And I think there is that other aspect of play that, and I think the reality is, we do need to be thinking about how can we support and maintain the longevity of the rural communities in the
Yeah.
prairies here.
So you have technical research training and a bit of a boots on the ground history, and people have given you credit for thinking like a good extension person to make that bridge. Um, if I had friends that dropped $10 million on your lap as a researcher for the next couple of decades, uh, how would you how would you get excited and say, boy, the place where I really am optimistic about where we're going to make some progress in research is in this, and I'd love to be in the middle of it. What would you do with my 10 million bucks?
Well, I do think, you know, regardless of the particular agronomy topic, I guess, that we're looking at, I will go to this extension piece that you noted. I think one of the tragedies of research, of course, is, over the years, there's millions of dollars that's spent on good research and no one ever hears about it.
Mm.
It's put into a report that's sent to a funding agency, they rubber stamp it, and it lives on a website somewhere. But I mean, beyond that, what tangible impact does it make? And so that's one of the reasons why I am so passionate about extension. So thinking about, how can we create a system of a pipeline, I guess, if you will, of research work that's done at the universities or AFC, et cetera, these institutions out to the producer. And so there's things like, where do you do it? When do you do it? What's the best method to get that communication across? And then there is this other piece of recognizing that some of these issues are complex. There's lots of different stakeholders at play that have diverse opinions and diverse outcomes or idealized states. How do we bridge those gaps? So I think that's something that I'm really passionate about, is how can we, I am optimistic about, innovation. I think we can meet some of these challenges. I'm not concerned about the technical point, but I'm maybe more concerned about, if we have some of the technical solutions, can we actually implement them, or how are they actually implemented and adopted in the real world?
And I'd like to follow that a little bit with the the evolution of the kind of new extension tools or approaches or the kinds of things that do connect those dots in the way that you say sadly sometimes aren't connected. Um, what might that look like, or where are the smart investments in in processes that would make uh, uh, extension um, more more productive, that meet the target and kind of create the kinds of changes that are possible. What is it that you, if I gave you the $10 million to change or build a extension system or or support one, what would those things be?
Yeah, I think there is an aspect of, physically getting out to the communities and the people that are using this information. I mean, I'll admit myself, I live in the Saskatoon area, and geez, it's pretty nice to give a talk in downtown Saskatoon, right? But I mean, uh, not everyone lives in downtown Saskatoon, right? And so I think it's kind of
Even fewer farmers, I'm told.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, and again, it's not nothing really new, but honestly, just getting out there. I think we are in an age where, maybe the days of giving an hour-long presentation from a PowerPoint doesn't resonate as much as it used to, or not maybe as effective as
Right.
it used to. So, I mean, thinking of a little bit more kind of interactive or different ways of doing things. The other thing I have kind of been concerned about a little bit over the years as I thought about it is, we can become passionate about a topic, but I mean, I think oftentimes we like to speak to our echo chamber, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And so it's a comfortable place where we get that affirmation and things like this, but is that, the best method? So maybe thinking outside the box and, engaging with the non-traditional audiences, things like this is probably something that we're going to have to explore too.
Well, and I appreciate that you're working with us on some of this peer group activity that's happening, as I suspect that some folks, I think uh, you don't, but others sometimes underappreciate the sophistication of of the farm CEOs that are
Hmm.
managing multiple technologies and disciplines at once.
Hmm.
And in many ways, that if we get that, if we listen to that right, they can drive an agenda to have people like you and I and others that maybe have a specific expertise and engage us in the way they need us, and instead of the way we wish they'd engage
Hmm.
us.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
that isn't always a perfect match, but
Yep.
coming from the person who needs it is probably more profound than the person
Yep.
who wants to tell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really appreciate you had some time for us today, Blake. As I read your resume and the folks that are dealing with you, uh, you got decades of work to do in this world, and I'm pleased, and I'm sure m many others are, that you have an energy and an enthusiasm to do that, and I'm sitting on the at the dock retired. I'll be interested in watching in the farm papers and other things, the kind of stuff that you are tirelessly pursuing. We hope that continues to have a connection to soil health and soil communities and community health. So appreciate your time today.
Yeah. No, thanks very much, Brent. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Great chatting with you.
Good deal. Bye for now.